Welcome everyone to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio, except we're doing the video version today. And we're really excited, Lou and I, to have Tony Uphoff with us, who is President and CEO of Thomas. That's the corporate umbrella. Underneath that is thomasnet.com. And if you haven't heard of thomasnet.com, we'd all be surprised. I mean, it's possible, but type in thomasnet.com, and it's a wonderful directory of information for manufacturers. It's been around for years. It's converted from the old green books, Lou, that you used forever into the new digital version. So,
I still use it.
You know more about that than I do because you've been working with it for 40 years.
I have. And they're a good company to work with. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. It's always a blast to be on with you and Tim. Good to see you, Tim.
Yeah, nice to be here with you.
Okay. So, Tony, what's new at thomasnet.com?
Yeah.
Or Thomas?
A lot. And so I'll just give you a few things. And
yeah.
We stay in touch, so you're aware of this. Perhaps some of your viewers aren't. So we're about to launch later this year version 5.0 of ThomasNet. And so we've gone to versioning of the platform with a really myopic focus on the user experience. So we run ThomasNet today like a paid procurement platform, but it's free to the user.
Right.
And we increasingly are adding features that add the functionality around how a buyer buys today, their jobs to be done. So you'll see a whole new set of features that are going to be added to the user experience. Other thing we're doing in 5.0 is enhancing the supplier experience so that the supplier can get a similar type of experience and go on and manage their content, manage the information they have on the platform in just an easier and smoother way.
Are you saying something that you said about 3 lines back? Is the buyer experience changing?
Boy, it has changed a lot, as you know, and you and I have talked extensively about the latest data is now that 70% of a buyer experience is through before they engage with a sales rep today. And this is the impact of the internet. It's the impact of platforms and tools like ThomasNet. But what it's also doing is creating, frankly, some turbulence and havoc amongst manufacturers, as you know, Lou, because what we're witnessing in real time is an acceleration of the digital transformation of industrial marketing, sales, and supply chain management. And while those are easy words to say and they sound kind of buzzy, the fact of the matter is a lot of North American manufacturers are still struggling because they've not really thought about sales and marketing as a strategic imperative. They put most of their energy around engineering and process management and factory floors. Right. And I'm generalizing here, obviously. But it's a real challenge, I think, for a lot of companies. And so we try to spend a lot of time taking the data from our platform. Every 2 seconds, somebody's selecting a product or a supplier on ThomasNet and just sharing it in the marketplace so that we can give some visibility to what that journey looks like to help companies understand how to manage that process.
To support your point and the fact that All Metals and Forge Group, which is our metals company, and Manufacturing Talk Radio, we're dealing with lots of suppliers, manufacturers, and so on. And what we're finding, again, to support your point, is that manufacturers are so busy running their businesses as a manufacturer and quality and engineering and all of those things that they have a difficulty in broadening their scope into bigger markets, better markets, competing against their competitors in a better way, a different way. And which, by the way, Manufacturing Talk Radio is exactly that.
You bet.
We started Manufacturing Talk Radio. Next month will be 6 years. And the whole idea and plan was to bring more manufacturers through Manufacturing Talk Radio to All Metals and Forge Group. And it's working.
Well, and I've shared with you and Tim before, when we first met, several years ago, you all were innovators. You still are. I mean, this is not as common as we might see in other industries. And it's funny, Lou, picking up on your points, we spend a lot of time sharing in the marketplace. There's 3 huge trends that we think are creating both challenge but also tremendous opportunity in the manufacturing industry. So the first one is this digital transformation of sales, marketing, and supply chain management. Globalization is the second one, and tariffs and other things fit into that. And these are linked, obviously. They're linked together. But the third is a changing demographic workforce. So in 2017, and you and I have talked about this before, in 2017, demographers saw the first time in history where a second generation that is the same size of the largest generation ever created, the baby boom generation, the millennial generation, is in the workforce at the exact same time. So in the case of ThomasNet, half of our usage from active registered users are millennial managers today. And that's changing so many things. So you can link that back to the digital transformation accelerating. Obviously, these are digital natives. These are people that don't remember. It's like my generation. I don't remember a world without the television. I'm sure for my parents, they thought, what's this kid staring at this box for, right? My daughter's generation, millennial, she doesn't remember the world without the internet. So they're starting to change our companies, and it's important for U.S. manufacturers to know two things about that. One is that's their workforce, but it's also their customer. Right? So that we live in a multi-generational workforce where, frankly, Tim, the stretch of that demographics is broader than it's ever been. Our demos now go from 18 to 70 of the active registered users on the platform, which is really remarkable.
Right. One of the problems that exist, and we'll probably talk about it maybe now, and that's the skill gap. 10,000 people a day are retiring or dying, and only 4,000 are coming into the workforce that same day. So we already have a deficit. And they need to really find the solution, which is there. There is a solution. Nobody wants to talk about it. The solution is, and I guess you want to talk about it, Tim?
You go ahead, Lou.
Oh, all right. So we have 2 million prisoners that don't need to be in prison, that maybe they should be retrained differently instead of learning how to produce textiles. And when they come out of prison, they have to go to Malaysia to get a job. And maybe they need to be trained better within the prison system. We also have, let's see, immigration. That's where we got our original industrial manufacturing workforce in 1900 with the immigration. And some of us are the ones that are not playing that game.
Lou, I don't need to tell you, you know it as well as anybody in the industry. I think the latest stats is there's about 1.5 million open jobs. They're projecting this to, continue to go up, and not in a positive way, meaning there'll be more open jobs. Talk about competitiveness. If we can't figure out solutions to this, and I think your solutions are very innovative. I mean, you've got a great history at this, but you also have a multifaceted background where you can see this from a lot of different angles. The thing we look at in this part of the marketplace, and one of the things that I should have mentioned that's new for us, next month we're going to be launching a podcast that's going to come out twice a month, and it's interviews, and we'd love to have you on to talk about some of these trends. We've got about 6 or 7 we've taped, and we're going to continue to do a couple of times a month.
I should be on the first one.
As I'm saying these words, Tim, I'm thinking to myself, I should have invited him already. I'm in real trouble now. And then the interview went downhill from there.
Yeah, it went downhill from there.
But one of the people we had on at the very earliest place is a guy named Dr. Sal Menza, and he is the superintendent of the Wallingford, Connecticut School District. The reason I was so impassioned to have him on is I went to our friends at the Department of Commerce about the skills shortage, and I said, other than wringing our hands and all that kind of stuff, we're a big platform. We can advocate for this. Show me an example of where this is working, and I want to shine a light on it. And what this guy did, and I won't tell the whole story, but 7 or 8 years ago, when he took over the position, he went to 10 manufacturing companies in town and said, sit on my board and help me draft the business plan for the school district. And what they've done is they've gotten parents and kids and everybody organized around, hey, maybe Tony should go into manufacturing. Maybe that's a really cool career. Maybe Tony doesn't need a 4-year degree. Maybe he needs a 2-year trade degree. Maybe there's apprenticeships. Now, can that scale in other areas? Don't know yet. But I think these types of innovative solutions are things that we, as an industry, just need to highlight more and see where people can replicate them.
Well, let me tell you a story that happened just recently. I'm on an advisory council for Virtual Enterprise International, and it's a educational system that they sell their program to high schools of teaching 11th and 12th graders how to become entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And
Love that.
I came up with a tagline a couple of weeks ago with them, entrepreneurship as a career.
Yeah.
And
It's a great line.
And they've got 600 schools that they're in right now.
Yeah.
They've got 15,000 students that are involved, and they're in 17 states.
Yeah.
And we're looking to really help them promote them.
Yeah.
And perhaps we should be talking about that.
I'd love to have you come on and talk about those types of things.
Great.
Because it's, look, I don't want to get too far down the path of advocacy because it sounds like a slogan, but I think we owe it to the industry that we serve to be able to showcase solutions like that.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
We don't have a point of view other than we advocate for industry. I mean, that's what we do.
And I agree with you, obviously, that the government, and I'm not going to say anything nasty, the government is not the one who we should be relying on to help industry.
I agree.
That's all I'm going to say about it.
No, I agree. And it's something that is, the skills gap is near and dear to all of our hearts. And I think it's something that to your point, there are solutions out there, and there are things that are working. I just don't know that we have them up to scale yet. Right. To really attack the problem in a far more measurable way. Yeah.
But there are, like I said, there are solutions, and there are people out there who are really committed.
Yeah.
And the people that I met at VEI, they're incredibly committed people, and I'm glad to be part of it with them. And, like I said, we'll talk about it.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
So Tony, as you travel the country, and we're talking about some of the issues and challenges that manufacturing has, what are you sharing with your audience about the state of U.S. manufacturing? It seems to me it's pretty good, and it's been good for the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. What's it look like for the next year? How's it going now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tim, and I'd love to open up a dialogue amongst the three of us about that. It's interesting. I had the great good fortune to be live on Fox Business the day after the ISM report, the procurement report that tanked the markets by 500 points. So it was a fascinating time because I was asked, Tim, basically the same question. And twofold, and I hope I don't offend anybody by what I'm about to say, anybody in your audience, but
be my guest.
The ISM report was developed in 1948. It's never been updated. It's a survey amongst 300 purchasing professionals who are unnamed, and they attempt to uplift that survey to a $2.3 trillion U.S. manufacturing industry. So I'm reasonably facile with numbers. You're reasonably facile with numbers. Let me just help you. That doesn't work. It doesn't compute. The math doesn't tie out. On the exact same day that the ISM report came out, IHS, a professional research company who has a much more in-depth sample, actually showed expansion in the month of September. So, I think there's so much false data out there, Tim, and some of it's false positive, some of it's false negative. The average American doesn't realize there is no such thing as a point of sale system for the manufacturing industry. Yeah. It's not like we're barcode scanning these, custom manufacturing products when they go out. All a long way of saying, if I look at the IHS reports, I look at the data we can see in demand on our platform, and we've got 10,000 plus customers. We're constantly out talking to markets. We track all this data. We see a very, very healthy U.S. and North American manufacturing industry right now. Couple of trends that are underneath the covers that are causing some areas of concern or challenge. So you don't have to get too far from the tariffs to kind of realize, okay, that's something that is causing, if not some challenges, it's causing some pause. And so what we're seeing is in the areas where the tariffs have been enacted, we can see very clear and sustained increases in North American manufacturing for those types of goods. So we can see it in steel, we can see it in aluminum, we can see it in lumber, we can see it around PCB boards and others. So again, very clear lifts of demand with North American suppliers. Now, what's less difficult to see, but we intuit, is even, let's take lumber as an example, even with that increase, it's not going to outrun business lost if you're no longer doing business with China, right? So as of yet, that increase in demand won't outrun the loss of a buyer the size of a major Chinese buyer. So there's clearly going to be some movement around as those tariffs move back and forth. I spent a fair amount of time with Congressman Tom Reed with the 33rd District and in New York, and he sits on Ways and Means, and he's a very influential guy in these areas. And I don't think I'm broaching any confidence. I think he's reasonably complicated. This is going to swing back and forth, but we're going to get to an equilibrium here around the tariffs and understand how these can be rectified and how we can move forward with this. We may go through a little bit of turbulence as we get there, but I think that'll be worked through. And I guess the last piece I would mention is there's some drivers to the U.S. manufacturing economy that I think, because there's such a misperception that the average person probably doesn't see, Tim. So, reshoring has been on a sustained basis for the last 5 years. So these are U.S. companies, as you well know, moving manufacturing back to North America, and they're not doing it for altruistic reasons. They're doing it because it makes good economic sense today and quality sense, right? So that's been a sustained phenomenon that's been happening here. Employment levels in U.S. manufacturing, we added 4,000 jobs, I guess it was last month. We're at 1948 levels of total employment in U.S. manufacturing, which is really remarkable. The average person kind of, wait, what? How is that possible? Because they've been told that everything went overseas and there is no U.S. manufacturing industry. And I think, those misperceptions are done for reasons, political expediency and different things. I think it doesn't tell the full story, Tim, and long answer to your very straightforward question, but I think it's a healthy marketplace. I think we have our challenges around skill shortage, which is a significant challenge. I think this digital transition is causing more challenges for companies than it probably should at this stage, but it's a good problem to have, meaning this can be worked through. This is not an insurmountable challenge. It's really more about companies making the right investment in talent to understand how to manage that kind of a transition. But I think overall we got a pretty healthy market.
Taking the next point, being that you, as we are dealing with so many manufacturers and you're traveling around the country listening to all their tales of woes and their good stories and bad stories, what's the basic underlying feeling about the tariffs? Do the manufacturers understand what's really happening to them?
My honest answer, Lou, is I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. So I would say if I start at the end and then work backwards, I would say of probably over the last, I'll say 1,000 conversations I've had, in and around the tariffs, a lot. Like you all, we're out engaging and we're speaking in front of groups. Almost to a person, people come back and say, hey, I may disagree with how we're going about this. I may disagree with some of the perceptions and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is this is something that's needed to be reconciled for years. So pretty consistently hear that. And by the way, I don't ask them their political persuasions. My guess is there's people from both sides of the aisle, if you will, right, that are espousing that. Some industries have been hit harder than others. So we have several customers of ours in the lumber marketplace that have really felt the pinch, and because of the old NAFTA going away and some of the tariffs have felt it. I think to your point, Lou, I think in its own weird way, it's a little like the ISM stuff. The data we have in our industry is so scant that people rely on. I think a lot of people don't know. They're trying to figure out, hey, is this new tariff friend or foe? Is this going to help my business or hurt me? And they're really not sure because it's not like one of these trade associations is going to give you a bunch of data and show you. So I think there's a lot of confusion. And as you know, markets don't like confusion. But there's a fair amount of confusion. I was going to ask you guys, what are you hearing from people about?
Well, there is confusion, and I think that many believe that this is a good thing, that we needed to do this, we needed to teach China a lesson, and so on. But again, to your point, there's other ways of doing it, and tariffs have never worked. Quotas might work better, and it won't hurt us at the same time that we're supposedly helping us. And my personal belief is we're not helping ourselves with this. And like I said, a quota system has worked in the past. tariffs don't.
If you we mentioned before kind of these three drivers, right? The digital transformation, globalization, and the multi-generational workforce. When you look at globalization, it is linked to the advances in technology. Whether we want to think about it that way or not, we live in an interconnected world today. That's the reality of what we do. The Chinese market can't exist without the U.S., and the U.S. can't exist without the Chinese market. That horse is already out of the barn, if you will, right? So I think, to your point, Lou, I think, perhaps, a more in-depth understanding of what might work. How could we do this? How do we deal with it? And boy, you can watch, the thing that's probably most surprising people from a geopolitical point of view is we've only talked over the last 25 years about the West's influence over China. Now suddenly we're seeing China can have an influence over the West.
Sure.
And you don't have to get much further than the NBA to realize China can send a statement very quickly about what they think. And that's neither here nor there, but it's a part of the puzzle here that we've all got to think through what are the best ways to get win-win agreements in place with trading partners, because we can't pretend this isn't a major trading partner that we have to have a relationship with.
But not only that, the Chinese have gone ahead and they're doing certain things within their future, like dealing with Africa and bringing manufacturing there, the Belt and Road project and program that they're into. This is all sort of how they will not have to necessarily deal with the U.S. as much as they have been. So they're already planning this.
It's a very good point.
And we're not.
Well, and I think
we're not buying into it.
To your point, a lot of folks who know a lot more about these kind of political and economic issues than I'll ever know are talking about, kind of paraphrasing your point, Lou, of China playing the long game. And the U.S. kind of playing a short-term game right now. It's almost like the old differences between a private and a public company. The public company needs to look at the quarter, the private company can look at the year. And I think there's a little bit of that going on right now. I think there's some truth to that.
Well, not only that, I know I'm not going to get this correct, but there's a book that came out a couple of years ago, and it was called China, the 100-Year War. And it was written by a CIA operative who talks about what China had planned for the next 100 years. And I'll never forget, I was up at Cape Cod taking a vacation, and I said, I'm going to read this book.
Oh, boy. Wrong thing to read on vacation.
Really. And I didn't sleep at nights. This was unbelievable. And they're doing what they said they're going to do. And it's all written out, and this was written by an American CIA operative who had to get permission from all kinds of government agencies to even print this book, to write the book, and they're doing it. They are doing it. China is looking at the long haul, the long game, as you referred to it, and we're not buying into it. We don't understand how they're doing this.
I think it'll be fascinating to watch this play out over time, because I do think it's. You can't take the two largest economies in the world and have them start moving things around. There's this massive, and we're seeing it, ripple effect.
Sure.
Right? So, you go through the G7 or G8, I can't remember, do we call it G7 today, of the top economies in the world?
The new one is 7.
Yeah, and, those are the 7 largest GDPs in the world, and you look at that, and, if the top 2 have a disproportionate impact on the rest, which they do, this is a complicated time to try to predict global trends.
Well, if G1 and G2 dropped out of that, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 will just pack it in.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
we are the leader. China is the leader.
It's true.
Yeah,
it is true. Yeah.
So Tony, the other thing I know that you are watching, and you've got a lot of data with Thomas, is the digital transformation of industrial sales, marketing, and supply chain. And you recently put out an interesting commentary on. It isn't that you've forgotten how to sell, your buyer is buying differently, or something to that effect. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and I appreciate you commenting on it. So I sent to you and Lou. I recently wrote, because I get just so much information, and I want to share this with people out in the marketplace. So on the platform Medium, I wrote a post called, you didn't forget how to sell, your buyer changed how they buy. And the headline kind of gives away most of it, but basically what our data is showing is that phenomenon of the buyer being 70% of the way through a process before they engage with a sales rep. All of us now nod our head with that. We kind of, oh yeah, sure, we understand that. That makes sense. But what's happening now is it's forcing companies to realize that, say, word of mouth, or the annual trade show, or a lot of tried and true methodologies that they've been using, the phone isn't ringing anymore. No. People don't know who they are. Or
right.
The buyer that they used to deal with at big company X is no longer there, or perhaps no longer returning a phone call. And it's changing the nature of how sales actually operates. And some companies are embracing this, and some companies are struggling. Before we went on air, we were talking a little bit about this phenomenon, Tim, and we were talking about the average company in manufacturing can give you a lot of data on quote to cash, meaning how many projects did I quote and how many did I close, right? Well,
right.
The problem with that is if the buyer is 70% of the way through the process before they engage with you, you're only tracking the last 25% of a process, you're in real trouble today. So what we talk a lot about and use our data to help illuminate is you have to understand interest to invoice today. Meaning, hey, am I generating interest? Mm-hmm. Am I seeing the digital footprints of people who have a propensity to buy my product and service? And then, am I helping them with their jobs to be done? Through content, through information, through support. And then when they hit a certain level, perhaps it's that 70%, it's not a cold call when I engage with them.
Right.
It's a warm call now, right? Behavioral scientists, Tim, are talking about this thing called the relevancy firewall, which is that 70%. If you haven't developed relevancy, you know what? You're not getting in.
Right.
I mean, if I don't know who you are, I don't know the value you bring, I don't really understand much about your company you're offering, the odds that you're going to get into that last 25 or 30% and have a shot at winning the deal are going down. It's not impossible, but it's going down. And so that post is really, Tim, just, man, it's the amalgamation, if I can use that term, of so many conversations and then trying to take all this complex data we have and put it out in a way that can make sense to people. What we're watching in the process.
This all comes back to the original point that we were talking about, and that's marketing.
Yeah.
The new marketing.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing the new marketing, it's either change or die.
Yeah.
And there are companies that I talk to who still have not bought in.
Yeah.
The other day we're doing some marketing here, and I threw out a question. I said, should we be using our fax number in our marketing? I got a resounding no from everybody. Meanwhile, I'm the one who wants to use your 12 books or 27 books of the Thomas Register on the slogan of this show.
Yeah.
Some of hanging on to the old stuff is not bad, but if you're not doing the marketing, the new marketing, the transformation of the new methodology, you're really going to hurt.
I think you're touching on something that's fascinating, Lou. So we counsel companies all the time around this idea of, don't change everything. Be careful of, of changing buyer behavior. So we realize the buyer's gone online. We get that. They're doing all their research. Right. The example I give to people that don't come from a marketing background is you don't go onto a car lot today to look at cars. You go into a car lot to buy a car that you know everything about. You actually know more than the sales rep does because you've done all your work online. Right. The buyer's the same way. The average industrial buyer today knows far more than the smartest sales rep at any individual company about that company's offering, about who else has bought it, and what else is going on in the market. That's the nature of the beast today. So the asymmetry we used to have as sellers, where we had more information than our buyer, that's gone now.
Right.
The game's been changed around, right? So how do you operate in a market like that, and how do you add value? Concurrent with that is something you just touched on, Lou. We also say to companies, be careful about doing away with things that you feel might reflect that you're old-fashioned. Fax machine would be a great example of this. We've got about 1 million active registered users on ThomasNet. An average month is about 1.6 million users of the platform. And as we analyze that, we recently did a test where we took, we're always doing what are called A/B tests, where we'll funnel some of the audience to look at the same thing in two different ways to kind of see, what converts better. We took the fax number off, and left just the digital contact stuff, we got complaints for taking the fax number down from buyers.
That's very
from buyers.
interesting.
Now, I don't know statistically, could I have enough data to suggest that the fax really matters, but there is going to be a component of the buying audience out that are still going to do business in certain ways. And I think we need to be careful about going so far. It's a balancing act. And I think this is where we just also emphasize, really focus on the jobs to be done of the buyers in your market. They might be different or subtly different than another market. There could be sectors of the market that still use the fax machine.
You may find that your tires are slashed downstairs when you leave because the marketing department hears it. No fax machine.
Tim, I may need security to get me out of here today. Yeah.
But it's true that my feeling is, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
So leave it.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I'd go back to what we said earlier, Lou. When you realize the demographic stretch of an industry of, I keep using the numbers 18 to 70. We worked with a leading research company called Stratogen, and I've shared some of this research on the jobs to be done of the industrial buying process that we worked with them on. The scientists came back to us later and said they'd never studied an industry, a professional industry, not a consumer market, professional industry that had that demographic stretch to it. And so something unique is going on there, but I think it also says, hey, and it's not just age, but if that 70-year-old, the fax machine means something to them as a business platform versus the 18-year-old, as long as it doesn't alienate the 18-year-old, why not?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it could be one of those good examples that be careful of throwing that out.
Right.
You might be alienating somebody inadvertently.
So how many people did actually make a complaint about the fax machine?
It was below 100. It was, I think it was somewhere around 50 to 55. And we did, I can't remember how many we went through. Maybe we siphoned 1,000 or so. It was more than you would think.
Right.
And it was enough that we thought, okay, back up. And again, we do as many as, every day we're probably doing 25 to 30 what are called A/B tests on the platform. And it could be something simple, Lou, like, this button's red versus green, and does red do better than green? So we're always doing that kind of stuff. The other thing we started doing about 2 years ago, we actually record every visit to the platform and anonymize it, and then we can pull it up and look at it. So we can see an engineer at an aerospace company, Fortune 100 company, and we can look at what did they do and how did they interact with things and what did they use, what did they not use. And we use this for product planning. But it also gives us, I think, some emerging insights into how do these people use platforms like ours when they're making purchase decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's it. So what's the bottom line? Are you using the fax?
We're going to keep it. We're going to keep it. This just in.
All right.
The fax still.
The fax is back.
Next year, you never know. All bets are off. But yeah.
Everything evolves.
Yeah, right.
Everything evolves. Yeah. Well, this is all very, very interesting. We could probably talk for 3 or 4 days. I'd like to go back to the tariffs if we can for a minute. It's one of my heartfelt issues.
Yeah.
And do many of your people talk to you about it?
Lou, it comes up probably, I don't want to say every meeting, but in the most meetings. As you know, we have a program we call Together for Industry, and basically we just go around the country to kind of major manufacturing sectors. 100 people in the room, we serve breakfast, and we just take people through our data and then this research on the buying process and how it works. And inevitably in those, almost every time somebody will ask a question about what are we seeing as a result of the tariffs, and I answered just the way I did here, that we believe we can see some evidence that it is stimulating North America's sourcing, but at the same point, that's probably not outrunning business that the tariffs are probably holding back from lost relationships with perhaps China or Canada or other countries. I think it felt to me like it reached a bit of a fever pitch probably about 6 to 9 months ago, and people aren't asking quite as much as they did. And I hate to say this, but I wonder if deal fatigue just sets in. I don't know what the latest is today, so I'm just trying to manage through the business dynamics of this.
Right. It gets old quick.
It does.
It gets old
And
quick.
so much of it's so confusing. I think that's the real challenge here. Of there's so much. I'll call it misinformation or confusing information or conflicting information that I think the average person, we probably have more data than most folks do,
Sure.
we can't make hide nor hair of it. We get asked all the time, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I always try to say, we're not here to make that judgment. We can see the impact of it. To suggest that this is having a positive impact over time or a negative impact over time, or there's an alternative way of doing this, can't say that we can see it. We have opinions.
Yeah.
I try to live in Switzerland when I can on that, but I'm not always successful.
Yeah. It certainly is a challenging time that we're living through.
Yeah.
Tim, are you with us?
I am still hanging in here, Lou.
Yeah. We have a little television screen issue here. So
okay. I lost us, but we're still here broadcasting from Atlanta with Manufacturing Talk Radio. Tony, we always appreciate when you come on Manufacturing Talk Radio. Thomas has such great information that we almost want to do a monthly Tony segment to get that information out into the marketplace. And I don't know myself personally where I would go on ThomasNet to get it or find it, but I know that Tony's there, so we just go to you. Thanks for being with us.
Well, we could start a show called Tony Talks.
Oh boy! This is how we get into trouble when these crazy ideas go. Hey, thanks again, guys. You know how much I enjoy and appreciate that you have us on, and it gives us increased visibility. And many of the things that we've talked about, Tim, on ThomasNet, we've added a lot of actionable content, including the supplier content and the data that we have on there. And it's called the Market Insights section on ThomasNet. So we have about 500,000 pieces of fresh content. And it's also in there that someone can subscribe to Thomas Industry Update, which is our daily email newsletter where we distribute a lot of this information. So thank you, Tim, for having us on, and always enjoy chatting through these issues. And if I could, I have it now on video. I'm going to hold Lou to the reciprocal. He's going to come on the podcast, Tim. You're a witness to that. So
this afternoon?
Maybe next week. Yeah.
Next week I'm up at the Cape.
Oh boy! All right, we'll find a time.
Yeah. Well, I could always sit out on the deck with my iPad, and we could do a show from
the magic of technology.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Tim and I have done that.
Yeah.
I've been in Brazil. He was in Atlanta.
I love it.
We had a guest in D.C. and another one from California, and we were all on together.
It's funny, and when we break, you and I can have a conversation about that. One of the things that we're learning as we produce video content, but also the podcast content, the best ones are when somebody's in the studio with us. Mm-hmm. Because it's hard over the phone to replicate the nonverbal communication.
Right.
I can see how you react to something. I can see if you understood the question I asked or if the question resonated with you. And
sure. Body language.
We've done a few with somebody remote, if you will. I find that they're much better when they're in the studio, and you can also be more extemporaneous. Yes. You can suddenly come up with a different question because you're seeing how how they're reacting,
how they handle the first part of the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Again, it's been wonderful. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lou.
And I consider this a special show, and we're going to bill it as. And we're going to milk it for all it's worth. And again,
thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
It's always great to see you.
Thank
you,
Tim. With Tim.
Virtual handshake, my friend.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony, for joining us at Manufacturing Talk Radio. And as always, we appreciate our listeners and encourage you to go to mfgtalkradio.com to watch this or listen to any of our other episodes. Also, our sister podcast, Women in Manufacturing, and Manufacturing Matters with Cliff Waldman, which is a fascinating show. Tune into those, and thank you for listening to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio.